Let's get started here. We finished our series on the seven pillars about the wisdom hath built her house. And do you remember what the seven pillars are? First one is the presence of God, the prayer life of the believer, the priesthood of the believer, the purpose, the leadership, body life, and last week was guarding the life of the Spirit of Christ in our lives. If you, meaning any person, does not take the initiative to take care of whatever it is that you're supposed to take care of, your tools, your life, your car, your finances, your relationships, whatever, if it's not taken care of, then it what? Deteriorates. It just starts going downhill. I want to talk to us about something this morning that, um, most of the mistakes I've made in life were, and I say this humbly, is that they were made because I just didn't know. Now, there were mistakes, Colby, that I was going to go out and get drunk and act stupid or steal something and act stupid or lie and act stupid. I mean, there just some things that we just did. I remember in the eighth grade, I said to Johnny and Vernie, I said, let's take all the books and shove them in the cupboard and just keep shoving all the books in there. And when Miss Stuklusky opens the cupboard doors, they all came falling on her. And she didn't even turn around and look. She just said, Reuben, Johnny, Vernie, to the principal's office right now. She just threw our names out there like we were guilty, which we were. So there are some things in life, though, that you and I can learn. So courage. To live in courage requires encouragement. Us men, ladies, I think I've said this to us before, that when I've asked a woman, what kind of guy would you like? Sensitive, kind, soft. I said, you want another woman. You don't want a man.
Oh my goodness.
You no, you want a guy that's going to fight. You want a guy that's going to protect you. You want a guy that isn't, afraid of getting nitty gritty down in the dirty. I mean, you don't want this guy that says, I'm sorry, I can't protect you right now because I might get dirty. No, you want somebody who is going to stand up. And when that happens, there's something in us men that says fight mode. And I remember when I was growing up, whenever we got in a fight with another guy, it was always you push the guy and you go, you hit me first. Oh, okay, boom, That guy got a big fat nose and it's all bloody. But courage is something that we have to understand the dynamic and how it works. So to live in courage requires encouragement. The children of Israel, and if you have a hard time with the Old Testament, just look at it like this. Everything in the Old Testament happened for an example, for lessons. It's not some great theological that you have to understand all why the these and why all the thous and why all the begats and all the names you and I can't pronounce. It's just like people look at that and they're like, oh my God, this is why I don't want to be a Christian. There's just too many names, but it started as a theocracy, or where God ruled, and then it went into an anarchy because man wanted to rule, and then it went into a monarchy where man said, okay, let's have a king. So what you and I have to realize, Carol, is that when we try to change the order, it really messes it up. Just like we're seeing today in society, when guys want to be called girls and girls want to be called guys, and and we're doing all of this swapping around and all these pronouns and all this stupid stuff. It just doesn't make any sense, and it's not supposed to. So in Acts chapter 13, verse 22, it says this, and when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, which shall fulfill all my will. Now, don't answer me, but let me just ask the question. Since David was an adulterer and a murderer, and I'm sure some other things, why would God say David is a man after my own heart? I mean, uh, Blake, didn't God know before David ever committed murder that he was going to do it? Yeah. Did Robin? Did God know that David was going to lust after Bathsheba and get her pregnant? Yeah. Well, what about the people watching David and saying, "Man, that is not a good example of the king of Israel"? I mean, why would God, say that about this guy? That I mean, he is not on the top 10 popular list of the best behaved Christians. Well, because God sees the bigger picture, and because God has something far beyond our comprehension or our interpretation of how it should look. Let's look a little bit as to why God called David a man after his own heart. First of all, let's go over to 1 Samuel chapter 13 and verse 14. There's where I got the 14 mixed up here. 13 and 14 says this, but now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart. So the Lord is looking for a man or a woman or a person or a nation or a country, a group of people after his own heart. And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people. And then God says this, because you have not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. He's talking to Saul. What removes an individual from being a person that God wants him, a man after his own heart, is a person who refuses to do what God says to do. That's just, Penny, that's just kind of putting it in nuts and bolts, 4 plus 5 is not 11. 4 plus 5 is 9. The reason you're not a person after my own heart is because I've asked you to do some stuff and you won't do it. So if you ever had a job where the boss said, this is what I want you to do, and you don't do it, and he says, you're fired. You're like, you go home, you go, I don't know why he fired me. Well, because you didn't do what he asked you to do. That's what God was saying here. He's saying, the reason that you're not a man or a person after my heart is because what I asked you to do, you're not doing. It has nothing to do with the color of your skin or your gender or how much money you make or don't make or how many years you've been in school. Be at a minister's meeting and somebody would say, well, what seminary did you go to? I go, the street seminary. And they just kind of turn like, oh, okay. And start talking to the guy over here. Kind of like a street fair, Ken, I'm sorry, I just didn't have the money or the time or the want to go to a seminary. I just kind of have grown up on the street, spiritually speaking, and here we are. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, let's read another portion here. Chapter 15, verse 23 says, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. He's talking about Saul. He says, this is what's exempted you from being a man after God's own heart, is that you've rejected the word. But when God says, listen, you're rejecting my word. So God just kind of, like he just kind of brings that chalkboard right up real close, like I can't say I can't see it. He says, here's the word, and you're still rejecting it. Kind of like some years ago, that little phrase, what is it about no that you don't understand? It's like, I don't know. I just don't know. So then in verse 26, and Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with you You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected you from being king over Israel. There comes a point with God where God says, okay, I told you not to play with fire, and you burnt the whole block down. We're taking the matches away from you. We're putting big mitts on your hand so you can't light a match anymore. I'm rejecting you. You can't handle fire. Are we getting the point? God says, if you're going to be a person after my own heart, I need you to do what I ask you to do. I need you to not reject what I'm telling you. I've told a story when we were picking berries, and my dad was, behind us 5 or 10 feet, and we were pushing the strawberry cart, and he asked me how many I like, and I'm like, I like them all. That's why I'm eating them. But see, in Texas, when somebody says, how many do you like? What they mean in that is, how many do you have left yet to fill in the little boxes? Yeah, 20 boxes or 24 boxes. I can't remember, to the flat. 12 boxes, 12 boxes in the flat. Well, I didn't know, because I didn't know the Texas language. Tom, I just like, how many do I like? Yeah, that one tastes pretty good. Let me try the other one. Yeah, that one's pretty good too. See, so if we don't understand the language, Blake, we're walking around not able to obey. But God's pretty clear, and I just want to say this to you individually. You don't need me to tell you what to do. That's why God gave every man a conscience. The conscience is part of our spirit, where God speaks to us and says, no, that's God. That's not a Presbyterian minister or a charismatic minister or a Catholic minister. It's God. He's just saying, no. And Samuel said to Saul, you're no longer the king, because you have rejected the word of the Lord. So to be a person after God's own heart is start obeying what he's telling you. Start obeying. You don't need to come to church to hear that. Listen to your conscience. As we grow up, Phil, little kid, you say, now you got to share your cookies. No, I don't want to. No, you're going to. I don't want to. You're going to. You're not getting any. So, okay. So what was David's real heart? Well, first of all, he was tending to his father's sheep. Or let me put it in another term. He wasn't waiting to go to church. He was having church right where he was at. He wasn't waiting for the time that we sing. He was singing on the job. He was hearing God, and he began to write the Psalms. Yea, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He was singing songs. He was writing psalms. He was worshiping God even before he got to church. He was worshiping God. In other words, his heart was beyond the law. He wasn't waiting for the law to say, thou shalt be and thou shalt do. He was doing it. That's the kind of heart God is looking for, is hearts that are doing it. We were having church this morning. We had church 3 or 4 times after you left. And every time somebody disagreed with me, I said, oh, wait a minute. No, this is okay. We were having church in there, and then we had church in the sauna, and we had church in the jacuzzi. I don't go all the way in, but we had church in the swimming pool, just nonstop this morning. Tom, we were talking about God. We didn't wait to get here. The reason David was a man after God's own heart is because his heart went beyond the thou shalt. His heart was wherever he was at, Cheryl. He was having church. There was no one calling for a meeting. He was pouring out his heart in worship and in prayer. When you say worship, I don't mean that you have to be singing and you have to be waving your hands, or you have to be prancing around, or that you praying means this, your eyes are closed, your hands are folded, your head is bowed. It means that I'm giving, when I say worship, my definition of worship is I'm giving God my best. Prayer doesn't mean that I got my eyes closed, my head bent and I'm, muttering something, but prayer means that I'm open to this. There's that connection. David didn't have to wait for Sunday to start worshiping God. They have to wait to Sunday or Thursday night to start to be in relationship. Every twist and turn of life should be where we're acknowledging, thank you, Lord. I was coming back from the funeral I did yesterday, and I was going to get off on 220th, but as I was coming up towards the Ballinger Edmonds turnoff, the cars were just backing up. And I looked, and right there by 236th is, you can either take that and the next one would be 220. There was like 3 or 4 fire engines, a couple 8 cars, and just a ton of flashing lights. And the cars are just, they're trying to get around, turn this way and that way, and I'm like, oh, I'm getting off. I got off at Ballinger there and headed west to go see Janie. You never know when something's going to happen. You never know when you might be in that accident. When I got hit a year ago in November in Janie's car, that hit was so powerful that I was headed northwest, and the car, I went flying past, literally picked the car up, I went flying, I saw the telephone pole, Mike, and I ended up southeast in a split second. I would be dead if I didn't have that seatbelt on. The impact, if I didn't have that seatbelt, would have hurled my head and my body into the glass or into the door jamb, or I don't believe I would be alive. So a man after God's own heart is a person who their heart goes beyond the law, beyond the thou shalt, you have to, you must, but it's already in the field of labor. It's already worshiping God. He's already in relationship with the Lord. The second thing there is that David, he said, if you want to go with me over to 1 Samuel 17, verses 34 through 37. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept your father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and I took a lamb out of the flock, and I went after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I caught him by his beard. Oh my gosh. And smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them. See, and he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with you. The second reason that David was a man after God's own heart, he had integrity of heart. He knew that it wasn't his strength that delivered him, but it was the power of God. I was sharing with Cheryl in the group on Wednesday that what I learned from the campground was that God's provision and God's protection. When you and I say, well, I can do this, or I'm going to do this, or, as I said, and I've said it here repeatedly, God didn't let anybody help me for 4 years. Nobody. I asked for help from the Christian community. I asked help from the secular community. I asked for help from my pastor. I said, God, please help. And the skies were silent, Steve, for 4 years. There's a reason for that, is that God wants an individual to come to understand that no one is going to help you but God. Sometimes we have situations where praying for people and we get frustrated and we say, like, God, why aren't you, why aren't you? Well, just step aside and let God. He's more than able. He can do it. And if he chooses not to, he's still God. And so the reason David was a man after God's own heart is that the integrity of David's heart was, I could probably marshal up troops. I could probably, appeal to Saul because I've slayed his enemy. But he said, God delivered me out of the hand of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, and he'll deliver me out of this hand of this uncircumcised Philistine who would dare to defy the armies of the living God. So sometimes, and I know years ago we used to pray for people all the time, and we still pray for people, but I think that kind of prayer is overrated. Am I against healing? No, but I have known of people who were never healed of their particular dilemma, and they died and they got a brand new body. Take up your debate with God and let him just put your heart at ease and just say, okay, all right. You can argue, you can debate, you can rant and rave, but God is still over it all. God knew that David was going to commit murder. God knew that David was going to commit adultery. God knew that David was going to lie. And still he made him the king of Israel. And he said, through your lineage, there's going to come one that's going to sit on the throne, and he'll never be removed. And that's none other than Jesus Christ. David was anointed king, but he didn't really get to rule till about 10 or 13 years after he had been anointed king. Can you wait 13 years? Can I wait 13 years? I can't wait 13 minutes. I mean, there's people in front of me in Karina, they're driving 27 and a half miles an hour, Ken, and the speed limit is 35. And I'm like, come on! Shirley, get out there! And in that meantime, Saul was chasing David to kill him. And in that meantime, David had gathered around him, if you want to go with me to 2 Samuel chapter 22, he had gathered some really choice friends, Ken. And it says David departed in 1 Samuel 22 thence and escaped to the cave Adullam. And the word Adullam means a testimony. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And here's the guys that joined up with David. Everyone that was in distress, everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented gathered themselves together unto him. And he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So here's David. He's been crowned the king 13 years, Teresa, 13 years, and he before he got to sit on the throne, and Saul was trying to kill him, and he went onto a cave, and all the guys that were distressed, in debt, and griping and groaning, moaning, discontented. I mean, how'd you like that for some positive input? So they joined themselves to him. And then over in chapter 30, it says this of that same book, chapter 30. It came to pass when David, verse 1, and his men were come to Ziklag, and Ziklag means enveloped by grief, on that third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag and smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire. So they took all the women, David's wives, all the kids, they took everything. And notice what it says in verse 6. David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him. All these guys that he made mighty warriors, these guys, Blake, that joined themselves to him, Carol, all these people that he had ministered to and helped them, Trudy, and got them back on track, Cheryl, all these people all of a sudden said, let's stone this guy. Ever since we joined with him, I mean, it's just gotten from bad to worse. We lost our 401k. They repossessed the house. They've taken our kids. We don't have our Cadillacs anymore. Oh my God. Stone him. Because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. I want to share some really good news with you. If you haven't faced rejection yet, it's coming. That's part of life. How do you handle rejection? I put it this way: if you splat on the pavement, do you have enough bounce? If you go, do you have any bounce to get back up, or are you just going to splat? A lot of people, they just splat. They're just they don't know how to encourage themselves. Well, David was a man after God's own heart because his heart went past the law. He wasn't bound by, I have to go to church, I have to tithe, I have to read the Bible, I have to pray, I have to sing. No, he wasn't bound by any of that. His heart was, he was already on the sides of the hills writing Psalms 23, playing on his instrument, singing unto the Lord and worshiping God. He didn't wait for Sunday morning or Thursday night. He said in verse 7, he says, and David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David. The ephod was like a linen tunic, like a garment worn by the high priest, and it was in front of the breastplate, and it had different stones on it. And when he put on the garment, what he was saying was, I'm going to worship God. I'm not going to go in the corner and say, oh, God, where are you? Why aren't you, just, moaning and groaning and blaming God and blaming everybody. He said, no. Bring me that ephod. We're going to worship God right now. We are going to encourage ourselves in God. We're not going to run off into the corner and hide and say, oh, like you remember when we had the atomic bomb drill, get underneath your desks. What's that going to do for you? Huh? Yeah, the whole building's going to go, just disintegrate. You and your desk and everybody else is going to be. But hey, get underneath your desk, put your hands over your head. Yeah. You remember that, Annette? Isn't that funny? And then it says, verse 8, and David inquired at the Lord, saying, I'd just like to propose to us that in the days going forward, just say, Lord, what do you think? Have you ever had a situation or will have a situation where you're grinding inside? You're like, oh, well, it's probably because we haven't inquired of the Lord. We're just like, Colby, we're like, I don't want to, I have to, we're just going back and forth, Karina. And maybe we should just stop all that grinding and just say, what do you want? The reason God rejected King Saul was because King Saul wouldn't listen to what God said. It's, when I was in the 6th grade, we got to go to the YMCA to learn how to swim, which I didn't know how to swim because my brothers were trying to drown me all the time. Right, and yeah, they're trying to drown Patsy and me, and it obviously didn't work. We're still here, but I remember the swimming instructor said, "Okay, kids, here's what you're going to do. You're going to jump in to the deep end, and when you do, I'm going to catch you and save you and help you." So when it came to me, Karina, I said, yeah. And he said, "You have two choices. You can jump in, and I'll save you, or I'm going to get out. I'm going to throw you in, and nobody's going to save you." I'm telling you, tough love. I said, okay. So I closed my eyes, and I ran, and I jumped in, and I was just swinging, I'm still here. It must have worked. So that's where we are with God. God says, why don't you inquire before you do something? Why don't you ask? Why don't you get in the habit of asking? Ask and you shall receive. Knock and the door shall be open. Seek and you shall find. Instead of after the fact. Oh God, what did I just do? Well, you just did the stupid thing by not asking. That's what you just did. The reason David was a man after God's own heart is because he, unlike Saul, David wanted to serve God for his purposes. Saul wanted to serve God for his own purposes. That's the difference. Because David was willing to listen to God's directives. Saul was taller than most of them, and he was this handsome warrior kind of looking guy. He was taking creatine, and his muscles were bulging, and and David was this little shepherd boy out in the field, smelling like the sheep, running around singing songs like some little girl. And God said, "Jesse, do you have any other boys?" "Oh, I got one out in the field, but he's the scraggly one. He's got knobby knees. And bring him in." And so Jesse brings him in, and Samuel says, "That's the one. That's the one." That one that's out there singing songs, worshiping God without having being told to, without being instructed to. His heart was open to my spirit. He began to write these songs and these psalms, and out of his innermost spirit flowed rivers of living water. And you and I are recipients and benefactors today because he was a man after God's own heart. He wasn't somebody didn't have to tell him. He just did it. I've shared with you, Ken, my first funeral that I did, I was probably 5.5 or 6, because my duck, which Patsy wanted to keep, and we kept fighting for this little duck. Finally, the next door neighbor, this is how God works, and that little chihuahua built the little duck's head off. And I put the little duck in a matchbox, and I did my first funeral and planted a little American flag on it. Little did I know that I would be doing that. Since 1984, when I did my dad's funeral, and then in the 90s, and I mean, I was doing sometimes, Robin, 30 funerals a day. I did as many as 5 funerals in one day, and little did I know, and that God was preparing me to do that. The reason David was a man after God's own heart is because David didn't use God's favor for himself. Let me just say this to us. If God blesses you with something, talent, money, singing, playing instrument, influencing people, whatever it is that God uses you in his favor, and you use it for yourself and not for him, not a good thing. In the 70s, we saw the explosion of the music ministry, 60s and 70s, and it got ugly. It got ugly because all of a sudden people wanted to get paid big bucks. And there was a lot of churches that suffered because of the battle of the music ministry conflicting with the preaching ministry, and the worship leaders and the musicians and the singers who were getting recording contracts, and they were being asked to stand on these pedestals and be worshiped, and it got ugly. Keith Green, who died promoted in an airplane crash, he just bucked the system. He said, you people are all, you're after money. You're in this for money. You're not in it to really worship God. He was telling the truth. He's saying, listen, whatever God's given to you, it's not for you. It's for him. That was the difference between Saul and King David. David didn't use the favor of God for his own glory, for his own benefit, for his own. Oh, yeah, God knew he was going to commit adultery. God knew he was going to be a murderer. God knew he was going to be a liar. But God said, deep down in the core of how I made this man, he is a worshiper from the get-go. He is a giver from the get-go. He wants to magnify and build my house for me. Saul was like, I just want to be greater and bigger. I just want people to, follow me. In 2 Samuel, I'll close with this. Actually, I got 2 more verses. 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 8. Now therefore, so shalt thou say unto my servant David, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I took you from the sheepcote, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people, over Israel. God said, I took you, David. God says, Colby, I took you. Steve, I took you. Ken, I took you. Cheryl, God says, I took you, Cheryl, from where you were. Don't forget it. I took you, Patsy. I took you, Bill, to make you whatever it is that he wants to make you in life. And then last of all, you remember the story about Jesus in Luke chapter 4, verse 1 says, and Jesus, being full of the Holy Ghost, or the Spirit, returned from Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. I hope that you are hearing what I'm saying, because there are things in life where you're going to think it's unfair that nobody's helping you, or not even God's helping you, or nothing's getting resolved. Everything is, sideways. And God says, I need you to understand that rejection in life is not a bad thing. It forces us to go to God. It forces us, glory, to trust God more than every answer we could get that mankind, Lisa, could give. He was led out into the wilderness. And then in verse 14, Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit. So if God leads us out into the wilderness, Tommy, we're going to return back in the power of the Spirit unto Galilee. And there went out fame of him through all the region round about. And then here's the culmination. He says in verse 18, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance, or proclaim release to the captives, and the recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised. It's taken me quite a few years to get here. 73, as a matter of fact. If we're not consistent, it's a lot longer than 73 years. It seems like 173 years. Why? Because you go forward 2, you go back 6. You're not making any progress. God is not a part-time God. Being a man after God's, or a woman after God's own heart, is not a part-time occupation. It's can you imagine when we get to eternity, Colby, and we're like, God, would you mind if I come back in a million years? There's some things I like to do over in these other planets. We just, you don't need me. I'm just gonna go venture around the other planets, and I can zip right back, in a flash. God says, no. Eternity is not about you. Eternity is about the harmony of the Godhead and his eternal plans for all of his creations, of which you and I are the only creation that will ever be able to sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. There's no part-timing. Encourage yourself in the Lord. Get courage by encouraging yourself, because you didn't wait for the law to say to you, thou shalt or thou shalt not. We didn't wait to have somebody say, you need to worship the Lord. We began to worship the Lord on our way to work, when we get up in the morning, when we're dealing with the stuff we don't want to deal with. You know what I found? As Shirley and Penny and Bill and Tommy and Carol, as you come to the instruments, you know what I found? I found in my life that when I'm grinding away inside, either you're God or you're not. And if you are, I'm going to be okay. And if you're not, I'm not going to be okay. But since I believe you are God, I'm going to be okay. And as a result, Gloria, I'm giving him everything that's okay and not okay, Robin. And it's okay. Because when I graduate from planet Earth to the next, wherever I'm going, I know where I'm going. Thank you. That reminds me of the story of the old guy that was on the train, and the ticket guy came by, and he says, can I see your tickets? And the old guy's looking around for his ticket, and he goes, well, I lost my ticket. He says, I don't know where I'm going. And the conductor says, oh, I know where you're going. Can you give the Lord a hand clap this morning?